The Babes in the Wood Murders. The murder case known as the Babes in the Wood Murders is among Brighton's creepiest incidents. Regretfully, the case remained unresolved for over 3 decades until fresh evidence was uncovered. The Babes in the Wood Murders center on the deaths of fellows Karen Hadaway and Nicola, 3 9-year-old girls. Nicola and Karen were best friends who lived on the same street in Malscombe, Brighton, England, even though they went to different schools. Around 3:30 p.m. on October 9, 1986, the girls decided to go play after school. Unaware that it would be her final glimpse of the girls alive, Susan Fellows, Nikolai's mother, spotted them playing with a roller boot on the street at around 5 o'clock. After Nikolai and Karen left their neighborhood, a 14-year-old friend noticed them hanging out by some of the Lewis Road shops. After that, they were told to go back home because their parents would be worried about them. The girls were also spotted at a police box on Lewis Road about 6:30 p.m., and that was the last time their aliveness was ever seen by anyone. When night fell, it was time to go to bed. However, Hadaway and Fellows were still away from home. Their relatives started to worry. Michelle Hadaway, Karen's mother, called 999 right away to report the 2 daughters missing. When word got out about the girls' disappearance, the police and hundreds of Malscombe residents launched a major hunt for them. During the course of the search, someone claimed to have heard Nikolai Fellows telling Karen Hathaway something the night they were last seen going to the park. "Come on, let's head over to the park," Nicola remarked, alluding to Wild Park, where they were not allowed. After learning this, the search team concentrated on locating the girls in Wild Park. The bodies of Karen Hadaway and Nicola Fellows were found in Wild Park in the afternoon of October 10, 1986. The girls were found in an artificial cave. Additionally, an autopsy later revealed that they had been strangled and sexually abused. Brighton was rocked by the killings of the Babes in the Wood. Residents of Malscombe were perplexed as to who might have brutally attacked and killed the 2 endearing girls. The 2 sweet girls were raped and killed by the Sussex police. Following the start of the Sussex police's investigation, witnesses reported seeing a young guy by the name of Russell Bishop close to the Lewis Road police box where the girls had been spotted. They verified that he was dressed in what looked to be a light blue top, which would be found close to the crime scene by the police. Around 6:30 p.m., another Wild Park. The police had a suspect by now. On October 31, 1986, they located Russell Bishop and placed him under arrest in connection with the killings of the girls. This happened after he was questioned and provided several alibis and contradicting statements. Bishop was charged on December 3, 1986, with the murders of Karen Hadaway and Nikolai Fellows. He was detained while waiting for the next year's trial. Russell Bishop, a 20-year-old roofer and sporadic burglar, was a member of the search squad that hunted for the girls prior to his arrest. He claimed that during the search, his terrier Misty had an insurance cover for £17,000 because it was such an excellent tracker dog. Although Russell Bishop lived in the nearby Brighton community of Hollingdon, he was widely known in Malscombe. It seemed that he was acquainted with the families of the girls he killed. At the time, Dowie Judd, a friend of his, was lodging with the Fellows family. Bishop used to play cricket and football with Barry Fellows, Nicola Fellows' father. He also went to Nicola Fellows' house the day the girls disappeared, hoping to talk to his buddy who was staying there, but Nicola Fellows instructed him to go. The girls' parents in both cases advised them to stay away from Russell Bishop because of his reputation for showing sexual interest in young girls. However, Bishop frequently asked them to do errands for him and his expectant girlfriend, Jenny Johnson. He lived with his fiancée and their son, but there were rumors that he had a lengthy history of partnerships. Bishop was having an affair with a 16-year-old who lived next door to the girls at the time of the deaths. Russell Bishop's demise was ultimately caused by his close ties to the girls' quest. It was said that he led the authorities to the location where Nikolai and Karen were found. Russell Bishop was declared not guilty in the first trial in 1987, despite a 4-week trial held at Lewis Crown Court. This was partly due to errors made by the prosecution team. After a mere 2 hours of jury deliberations, Russell Bishop was found not guilty of the girls' rape and murder. Since no temperature readings were obtained on the body, it was impossible to determine the exact moment of Nikolai Fellows and Karen's passing. Due to the lack of scientific proof, the prosecution was only able to claim that the girls had been killed between 6:15 and 6:30 p.m. Russell Bishop's evasive and contradictory alibis went unchallenged as a result. Furthermore, no analysis was done on the blood discovered on Karen Hathaway's underwear, and neither were the handprints or hand measures around the girls' necks checked for fingerprints. In addition, a blue Pinto sweatshirt bearing the identical logo as the one Russell Bishop was observed donning on the day of the murder was discovered nearby, but the defense cast doubt on its veracity due to the police's carelessness in safeguarding the evidence. Throughout the trial, Bishop maintained that the blue clothing was not his. Jenny Johnson, Bishop's ex-girlfriend, admitted to police that the cloth belonged to him, but when she went to the witness box, she refuted this. Following the back and forth in court with no thoroughly investigated evidence, Justice Cheeseman, the presiding judge, instructed the jury to acquit unless they were positive that the girls had died by 6:30 p.m. Russell Bishop was released from prison due to insufficient evidence. Nikolai's father, Barry Fellows, was detained in 2009 on charges of planning to rape his daughter. Bishop's companion Dougie Judd was also taken into custody on suspicion of rape. However, a Sussex police spokesman later stated that the inquiry into the allegations of sexual assault was unrelated to the current murder investigation, leading to their release without being charged. The detectives at the time put in a lot of effort to identify the murderer, but they were limited in their efforts because DNA technology had not advanced by the 1980s. For over 30 years, the Babes in the Wood killings remained unsolved. Relatives and friends of Karen Hathaway and Nikolai Fellows met with the Sussex Police Department on the 30th anniversary of their deaths, seeking a re-examination and reopening of the case. Thanks to developments in DNA technology in 2016, the investigators were able to connect Russell Bishop to the odd DNA samples found at the crime site. Bishop and the abandoned blue shirt were linked by a 1 billion to 1 DNA match, according to Eurofins Forensic Services. Bishop's DNA was also found on a tape that was removed from Karen Hathaway's left arm. Although they lacked sufficient evidence to indict Russell Bishop at the time, the police had always felt that he was the suspect. But when he did the same thing again in 1990, they began to hunt for ways to prove he was the one who had killed the Babes in the Woods. Russell Bishop was detained and charged for a terrible attack on a 7-year-old Brighton child in 1990, 4 years after the kid was murdered. He had taken the 7-year-old girl from the street on February 1st, 1990, placed her in the trunk of his car, and driven to Devil's Dyke, where she had been beaten, strangled, and left for dead in a bush. She managed to make it to the side of the road by some miracle, where she was discovered and saved by kind individuals. Subsequently, the victim was able to recognize Russell Bishop as the attacker. He was accused of committing a crime that appeared to be the same as the Babes in the Woods killings later in 1990. Bishop was placed under arrest pending his trial. In December of the same year, Russell Bishop's trial resulted in a conviction for kidnapping, indecent assault, and attempted murder. After that, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 14 years advised to pass before he could be released. His crime spurred detectives to delve more into the murder cases of Nikolai Fellows and Karen Hathaway. The Criminal Justice Act of 2003 removed the double jeopardy laws, allowing for the discovery of fresh evidence against Russell Bishop. This led to the holding of a new trial over 30 years after the girls' murders. Russell Bishop was taken from his jail cell to a police station in May 2016, when he was detained once more in connection with the murders of Karen Hathaway and Nikolai Fellows. A December 2017 decision by the Court of Appeal reversed the 1987 acquittals and allowed for a new trial. October 2018 saw Russell Bishop's trial at the Old Bailey. With the help of modern technology, the prosecution was able to create a new timeline showing that the girls were still alive at 6:30 p.m. and that Bishop had returned to Wild Park to finish what he had begun. Bishop was finally found guilty of his charges on December 10, 2018. Following a 9-week trial and 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found the defendant guilty. Justice was eventually served to the families of Nikolai Fellows and Karen Hathaway when Russell Bishop was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum suggested term of 36 years. But on January 20th, 2022, at the age of 55, he died of cancer. Moving on to the next case. Kayla Unbijan. The mother of 9-year-old Kayla Unbijan, 40-year-old Heather Unbijan, and her disappeared from South Elgin, Illinois, on July 4, 2017. Kayla was to return to her father, 43-year-old Rihanna Skirka, who had full custody of her on July 5th. No one knew where she or her mother had gone. Kayla's family and the community searched for her non-stop for years after she was abducted, until an unexpected incident eventually happened. But how on earth could Kayla disappear? For how long was she apart from her family? South Elgin is a quiet neighborhood in Kane County, Illinois. There are more than 23,000 residents, creating a friendly neighborhood where people know one another by name and where doors are regularly left open. The peaceful environment of living here has been enhanced by the effect of Windy City, which is close. The historical and recreational features in the community will appeal to adventurers as well as history aficionados. However, a terrible event that occurred in 2017 marred the beautiful setting. The town's reputation for low crime was damaged by an unforeseen event. This served as a sobering reminder that security can be compromised even in friendly environments. On July 5, 2008, Ryan Eskurku and Heather Unbijan welcomed Kayla Unbijan into the world in the western suburbs of Chicago. When the couple eventually got divorced, a judge decided that Kayla's father ought to have complete custody of the child. With this court ruling, Kayla's life entered a significant new chapter. Because Heather was still permitted to spend certain weekends with her kid, family ties continued even after the divorce. 2017's 4th of July promised to be a festive occasion. Kayla was supposed to return home to her father, Ryan, the next day after celebrating the holiday with her mother. Ryan had no idea how the events that were going to unfold would impact his life in the years to come. Kayla was meant to return to her father on July 5th, which also happened to be her birthday. What should have been a happy and lovely day turned into a somber one. The joyful expectation of a father's hug gave way to a hopeless search when Kayla disappeared. Ryan was happy to go to Heather's house as they had arranged, having left his child with her mother for the weekend. He was eager to spend Kayla's birthday with her, but when Ryan arrived, he noticed that neither Heather nor Kayla could be clearly found. This worried him. Growing anxious and driven to find the truth and find his daughter, Kayla, Ryan took the critical decision to register an official missing persons report as the unsettling puzzle pieces accumulated. Heather later claimed to be taking her kid camping in Wisconsin, according to a family member. Ryan was stunned by their sudden departure. On my way home from work, I stopped by her house to pick up my daughter, but they weren't there. Her family was having dinner at her house when they informed me that she had gone missing from a camping trip and they had no idea where she had been. And no matter what he tried, he could not get in touch with either of them. He called the police to start looking for his missing daughter as soon as he understood how serious the situation was and started to fear the worst. Kayla's mother was watching her at a parade on July 4th in Wheaton, Illinois, when she was last seen. Ryan diligently sought out crucial information and governmental aid from July 2017 to May 2023. He expressed his honest wish to raise money for a specific cause on the GoFundMe website. He had a very clear goal in mind. The funds would be used to employ a private investigator and cover any further costs spent during the protracted hunt for Heather and Kayla. He stressed his family's steadfast commitment to this cause, as well as their safety and eventual reunification. Intentionally, Heather had shut off her phone and erased her social media accounts. Her imprecise notification that she was going on a camping trip to an unknown spot and would be back by 7 p.m. was only known to her closest relatives. When the pieces of the puzzle came together on July 5th, it was revealed through chats with her neighbors that Heather had been spotted loading her stuff into her car. This action occurred not long before her abrupt departure. Heather's absence from a requested court appearance on Friday, June 7th, added to the frightening tale. Her lawyer, bewildered by what had happened and unaware of what was going on, voiced serious concerns. There were a lot of unsolved questions and uncertainties in the story. A mother and daughter inexplicably vanished, casting a shadow over Ryan's life and sparking a community-wide hunt for answers that made for an eerie and depressing picture. In order to facilitate her extradition, Heather was the subject of a federal arrest warrant on July 28, 2017. In 2017, following Ryan's filing of missing person reports, Heather faced charges of child abduction, a Class 4 felony. Heather and the young female were reported missing. Additionally, South Elgin police actively sought out multiple sleds and tips after a court set her bond at $110,000. They also collaborated with law enforcement agencies across to attempt and locate them. The Gulf and Me community responded favorably to Ryan's request for help. Contributions to the campaign over the period of nearly 6 years totaled $2,500, bringing it closer to its $10,000 target. Months passed, then years, and still no leads turned up, so neither the mother nor the child ever showed up. The kidnapping case of Kayla Unbijan was forgotten until 2023, when an unexpected breakthrough occurred. An important breakthrough in the inquiry into Kayla's abduction occurred in November 2022. Thanks to the well-known streaming site Netflix, her story was seen by more people and expanded beyond its initial limits. Kayla made an appearance on the 9th episode of Unsolved Mysteries, a show that aims to shed light on fascinating instances. In the pre-credit scene, where the faces of missing children were deliberately aged to suggest how they could have appeared as teenagers, Kayla's picture was displayed. This important contrast between a photo of a 9-year-old Kayla and a fictitious portrayal of her teenage self happened in just 5 seconds. The Bring Kayla Home Facebook page, created the moment she disappeared, is still being used for communication and planning purposes. The image of the age progression, which depicted Kayla's fictitious appearance as she approached adolescence, was shared on this page and gained over 7,000 followers. This online community's steadfast dedication revealed where compassion and technology converge when seeking solutions. But there was still to be the pivotal moment that would change the trajectory of events. An attentive store owner in the Westgate Regional Shopping Center in Asheville, North Carolina, noticed a mother and a small kid on May 13, 2023. This astute observer thought he recognized their faces even though he wasn't sure at first. A picture of Heather Unbijan's face reminded her of a story that went throughout the country, and then the horrifying conclusion that Kayla, the missing girl, looked a lot like the little child who was with her. Strike. As soon as the shop owner saw how bad things were, he took action. He contacted the police as quickly as he could. As soon as the authorities received the information, a decision was made. It is roughly 7:26 p.m. As per the release made by the Asheville Police Department on May 13, 2023. Investigating a potential kidnapping, police headed to Plato's Closet in the Westgate Regional Shopping Center. It was revealed to the police upon their arrival that Kayla had been recognized from the Netflix series. This astute assessment sparked a chain of circumstances that resulted in Kayla's father and mother's long-awaited reunion and her mother's incarceration. After 6 hard years apart, Caleb and her father were reunited, ushering in a much-needed moment of harmony and unity. On May 16, 2023, the state's attorney's office for Kane County offered social media commentary regarding the sequence of events. It highlighted the collaboration between the Asheville police and their South Elgin counterparts by talking about the swift action that followed the recognition. This concerted effort led to the prompt identification of the 2 individuals, Heather Unbijan and Kayla, the long-missing child. Jerry Crouchick, the chief of police in South Elgin, conveyed his gratitude and the excitement that law enforcement agencies and citizens from other states were feeling. The results are pleasing because of these people's persistent efforts. Chief Jerry Crouchick stated that Kayla was in good physical and mental health following her reunion with her father. This positive result gave hope to detectives and families searching for loved ones who had been missing for a long period. Usually, digital breadcrumbs make monitoring easier, but Heather was able to avoid the typical patterns and remain undetected for an extended period of time. Heather could choose to face the criminal extradition accusation by complying or by declining to do so. As a result, on Tuesday, May 16th, she was set free. Her fleeting taste of freedom, however, was short-lived as she willingly turned herself in the next day in Kane County, Illinois, after posting a $25,000 bond. A pivotal moment in the story occurred when she was formally detained on suspicion of kidnapping a child. After the court proceedings, Heather came before the judge on Thursday, May 18, 2023. She was given bail because of her attractiveness and freed with the requirement that she wear an electronic monitoring device. Kayla's father sought a restraining order against Heather. This order required her to remain at least 1,000 feet away from his residence and to not leave Illinois without the judge's prior approval due to the circumstances. A state's attorney's office spokesperson for Kane County revealed the specifics of these legal actions. Heather Unbehan returned to Kane County Court to enter a plea to the allegation of child kidnapping. She was freed after taking these actions, but only after posting a $10,000 bail and agreeing to wear a GPS tracking device to ensure she followed the guidelines. It's unknown if she looked for legal representation or entered a plea. Ryan requested privacy amid family matters and court processes. He was at the time rekindling his friendship with Kayla, his long-lost daughter. The widespread dissemination of Kayla's tale and the advent of Netflix, a widely accessible streaming service, marked a turning point in the case. The reach of technology brought her story to the attention of the whole public. The impact from this revelation led to the reconciliation of Kayla and her father. It also resolved the enigma surrounding her absence. The episode involving Kayla appears in the 9th episode of Unsolved Mysteries Volume 3, Abducted by a Parent. In this episode, the long-standing mystery is ultimately resolved with Kayla's 6-year recovery, completing the picture. It's encouraging to learn about her finding and seeming well-being even after her extended absence. Ryan, her father, made a statement through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children expressing his joy and gladness. It was definitely a miracle that Kayla made it home safely after all these years. He conveyed his appreciation to the South Elgin Police Department and all other cooperating law enforcement organizations. The importance of the Bring Kayla Home Facebook page in disseminating information about her and her story was also emphasized by him. Ryan also requested privacy in light of this life-altering event as they proceed on their path of re-establishing their relationship and starting over. Moving on to the next case. Natalie Cochran, originally from West Virginia, a state renowned for its breathtaking natural beauty and close-knit communities, Natalie Cochran is a registered pharmacist. There, she made a name for herself and her husband Michael Cochran by leading an apparently normal life. It appeared as though Natalie and Michael were living a calm life, but on February 11, 2019, Michael unexpectedly and mysteriously departed away, upending their serene lives. Later that year, a Ponzi scheme came to light, and Natalie found herself in the public eye as more and more claims emerged, raising the possibility that her role in her husband's death was deeper and more malicious than previously thought. Federal prosecutors filed a civil case against Natalie Cochran in July 2019, claiming that she ran a financial scheme with her late husband, Michael. Technological Management Studios and Tactical Solutions Group were the two businesses owned by the Cochrans. They allegedly misled investors into thinking that Tactical had contracts with the government to provide semi-automatic weapons to the U.S. Department of Defense and other defense agencies. With these accusations, a convoluted judicial drama begins. The Cochrans are accused in the civil complaint of misleading investors by giving them the impression that their government contracts were legitimate. Both businesses raised a minimum of $2,500,000 from 11 investors in total. Although substantial returns on investments were promised to investors, the reality was very different. Tactical did not have any government contracts for semi-automatic guns, according to U.S. Attorney Mike Stewart. Rather, the Cochran family is said to have used the investors' money for opulent lodging, fine dining, and other personal spending. Tactical donated to the Shady Spring Youth Baseball League and the football team at Shady Spring Middle School, among other local organizations. Additionally, they gave semi-automatic rifles to Shady Spring High School for a fundraiser where they were used as bingo prizes, with half of the money going to Shady Spring High Volleyball and the other half going to the Shady Spring Youth Baseball League, of which Natalie served as treasurer. This fundraiser raised almost $32,000. Even with the significant contributions, doubts regarding the money's validity started to surface. According to James Quessenberry, a member of the league board, Tactical's $16,680 check bounced, and many unauthorized withdrawals were made from the league account. Financial records were the subject of an internal audit. In July, Natalie filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy as the legal scrutiny grew. According to her bankruptcy documents, she didn't have much money or assets. She claimed to have a whopping $1,400,000 in liabilities and less than $600 in bank accounts. Federal and state investigations into the Cochran family's financial operations were spurred by the charges made against them. A letter claiming that investors would receive their returns on investment at a later time was reportedly sent to investors under U.S. Department of Defense letterhead. Natalie insisted that a large portion of the investment-related data was classified and off-limits to discussion. Natalie stated in a creditors' meeting that she was unable to pay her creditors because West Virginia State Police and federal officials had blocked her bank accounts. Michael Cochran, Natalie's spouse and business partner, passed away at Bowers Hospice House on February 11, 2019, 5 days after he was reported to have struck his head during a seizure. Authorities launched a second investigation because of the circumstances surrounding Michael's death. There were rumors that Michael had visited the hospital several times in the months prior for an undisclosed ailment. The case was being investigated by West Virginia State Police, according to a Raleigh County government official. Unexpectedly, early in September, a court order was carried out and Michael Cochran's body was removed from Sunset Memorial Gardens. According to reports, the court order's copy was sealed until the conclusion of federal and state inquiries into the events leading up to his untimely demise. Natalie insisted that her husband's death came from a seizure that was brought on by an unintentional fall that impacted his head. She denied any knowledge of what had occurred to Michael and claimed that he had been taken to the hospital 20 minutes after falling. Regarding the sequence of events and the presence of other adults in the house in the crucial hours before Michael was admitted to the hospital, there were differing accounts. Nevertheless, Natalie was charged with first-degree murder in November 2021 for killing her spouse. The fact that Natalie was already serving an 11-year federal prison sentence for her role in the Ponzi scheme at the time added fuel to the rumors that she was involved in Michael's demise. At a hearing in a Raleigh County courtroom, things unexpectedly turned out. Natalie showed up in court with cuffs on her hands, a brown skirt, and khaki pants. Her 2 teenage children and other family members were present. The prosecution unexpectedly chose to withdraw its charges against Natalie. The stated explanation was the need for further time to collect proof. The prosecution made a calculated move to enable a second look at Michael's corpse. Ben Hatfield, the prosecutor for Raleigh County, filed the move to drop the charges, citing the importance of re-examining the body to the case. Hatfield went on to say that before formally requesting the exhumation, he had conferred with Michael's relatives. Hatfield did not make the decision to re-exhume the remains hastily. He consulted a specialist to make sure the investigation would produce solid scientific proof. Hatfield's request stemmed from the requirement for a specific test capable of determining the amount of insulin present in tissue samples. When Michael's body was first excavated in September 2019, an autopsy was performed, but this test was not done at that time. There was opportunity for doubt because this particular test was absent. After the examination, Hatfield said there was a very good chance he would re-indict Natalie for her husband's murder. The prosecution's motions were accepted by Natalie's defense attorneys, raising questions about their tactics. Attorney Matthew Victor for Cochran disclosed that this action will give them a chance to obtain additional evidence from the federal probe. Their goal was to establish Michael's knowledge of the Ponzi scheme, a finding that, if accurate, would have a major bearing on the state's case. Even with the indictment withdrawn, Natalie's federal sentence still required her to serve several more years. This fact was taken into consideration when the charge was dropped. While she was serving her federal term, the objective was to carry out the required testing and acquire more evidence. After the hearing, Natalie got a quick opportunity to talk with her family before being led by the police out of the courtroom. She said goodbye to her kids and showed her love for them in a heartfelt conversation. Michael Cochran's parents attended the hearing as well. On October 24, 2023, Raleigh County Prosecutor Ben Hatfield made an announcement regarding the most recent development in Natalie Cochran's case. He stated that a special grand jury had returned a new indictment against Natalie, accusing her of killing Michael. A well-known forensic pathologist from Texas verified that Michael had been murdered once the body was excavated, and he blamed it on the unapproved exogenous insulin that had entered his system. Natalie Cochran is anticipated to go on trial in 2024 and be found guilty of all the accusations against her because the special grand jury session was held so late in its term. Vladimir Zelenin. Officer Freeman saw a man on Madison Street, New York, early on April 7, 1996, throwing big black trash bags into the river. The man froze when Freeman got closer. The officer's attention was drawn to the two automobiles parked next to the man, which had trunks full with trash bags. He searched and found something startling. They included blood-stained instruments and clothes drenched in blood, while the remaining ones included a severed body sliced into 66 sections in the most graphic way imaginable. The man getting rid of the bags introduced himself as Vladimir Zelenin, 40-year-old. It took the cops a while to identify the person who was inside the baggage. Sadly, Yakov Klusman, 48, a well-known cancer researcher and billionaire, was taken advantage of by Vladimir's devious behavior. Then, when he brought up the name of Yakov's wife, Rita Glusman, the case took the most unexpected turn. The key question at this point was, what role did Rita have in this unfortunate incident? Was she planning to murder her husband? Or was Vladimir just assigning blame to deflect attention and avoid the repercussions? But in order to truly comprehend this circumstance, we must go back in time and get to know the guy at its core. Yakov Glusman. What part did he play in this awful incident, and who was he? The birth date of Yakov Glusman is January 2nd, 1948. He was a scientist whose contributions to the study of cancer were acknowledged on a global scale. Yakov and his spouse Rita had grown up together in Ukraine, which was a part of the Soviet Union at the time. 1948 saw the birth of Rita Glusman in Travnieska, Ukraine. She was the oldest child born to Holocaust survivors Paula and Lev Shapiro. As a child, Rita saw friends and relatives perish at the hands of the Nazis, which gave her a unique viewpoint. But Yakov was too valuable as a researcher to be able to obtain a visa to depart. Rita found out she was expecting their son in February 1970, after they had left for Israel. To facilitate their immigration, Yakov gave up his academic career in the Soviet Union and took a menial carpenter job. Rita persuaded the UN to arrange for her and Yakov to be reunited in America with the aid of Jewish organizations. She also pushed the US Senate to assist in her reunion with Yakov by going on an 18-day hunger strike close to the UN. She persuaded the Soviet Union to grant Yakov permission to accompany her to the West. When the pair did eventually get back together in the US in 1972, Yakov was allowed to carry on with his scientific endeavors. They then relocated to Long Island, New York, in 1977 after a 5-year absence. Yakov founded Harbor Laboratory, a pharmaceutical business, in New York by 1987. Rita had also started ECI Technologies, her technology company, with Yakov's assistance at the same time. In 1987, Yakov advanced to the position of Director of Molecular Biology at Rockland County's Lytle Laboratories. Rita had to make the difficult choice to move to Long Island while operating ECI Technologies because Yakov was employed in Rockland. However, the family's prosperity increased over time, and they eventually moved into a large home in the affluent Upper Saddle River, New Jersey, neighborhood. If Rita and Yakov were genuinely happy in their marriage, Zalanon's assertions are unconvincing. Is he making this whole thing up to cover up something darker, like getting rid of Yakov to make money? Let's go back in time to when Yakov's body was discovered in order to gain a complete picture before drawing any hasty assumptions. Officer Freeman saw something strange in a parking lot near the river on Easter Sunday, April 7, 1996. He noticed two cars with open trunks right away. Additionally, he saw Vladimir Zalanin, who had one glove on his right hand and was dressed in a t-shirt. Big black garbage bags were being thrown into the river by Zalanin. Freeman approached warily and saw splatters of blood on Zalanin's shoes and slacks, as well as blood all over the medical glove. There was a lingering stench of drying blood. Upon further investigation, Freeman discovered another bag containing blood-soaked clothing and a bag containing bloody instruments, including a hacksaw, axes, knives, and a scalpel. The horrifying thing was that 8 other bags, found in the trunks of the two cars, included Yakov Glusman's sadly dismembered remains. His lips and nose were removed during the horrifying operation of chopping his body into 66 pieces. Standing beside Vladimir Zalanin, who had blood on his jeans, was Officer Freeman. Being Russian, he had trouble communicating in English. Surprisingly, he disclosed that Rita Guzman was Vladimir's cousin and that, just 11 months earlier, she had been instrumental in assisting him in becoming a citizen. Vladimir's shocking admission that Rita was the one who coerced him into carrying out the unimaginable deed of killing Yakov was revealed. Rita had already departed with her passport the day after Bergen County officers showed up at her house. Prosecutors became concerned that she might have escaped abroad as a result of this. But Rita was allegedly going to Long Island, while Zalanin was being held in Bergen County. She obviously knew that someone from the government would be looking for her. She made a brief stop in Ville along the way to take some New York license plates from a parked car so that her vehicle, with its New Jersey tags, wouldn't stand out as much. Although Rita's husband's death had not yet been formally ruled out by authorities in both jurisdictions, it was highly likely that she had planned the murder and was now fleeing the scene. They made clear in a public statement that they intended to talk to her. Rita vanished from view for 6 days after her husband's passing. On April 12, 1996, the cops eventually located her in Cold Spring Harbor, Long Island. Rita was discovered breaking into a guest cabin by a cleaning lady who was doing her normal round at the Hawk's Nest Cottage. The previous employer of her husband used to own this cabin. The woman reported the incident to the police right away after mistaking Rita for a robber. Rita attempted to flee by clambering out of a back window and onto the lab premises after being confronted. However, local police eventually located her and took her into custody. Notably, her automobile had a stolen license plate, and the police discovered a number of trip brochures, some from Switzerland and Australia, inside of it. Rita also carried travel details for flights to Switzerland along with her passport. Rita Glusman's arrest astonished the officers when they saw her. She was no longer the woman who dazzled in designer clothing. The police were increasingly concerned because she had completely changed her appearance. However, there was a snag that prevented the police from charging her with her husband's murder. However, when gaps started to show in the allegedly flawless exterior of their marriage, the research took a different course. While relocating from Long Island to New Jersey, the couple experienced unseen conflicts. It was clear that moving to New Jersey put Rita under financial strain, particularly for her business, ECI Technology, even though it was a shared decision. But there was one discrepancy. Although Rita had stated that the relocation had left them penniless, she was spotted driving an expensive BMW, dressing sharply, and leading a rather comfortable life. On the other hand, Yakov Glusman used to wear regular pants and drive a 1983 Nissan. Yakov Glusman left the New Jersey home in the summer of 1995 and rented a second-floor apartment in Pearl River, which was a few blocks away from his place of employment. Yakov Glusman had begun a love relationship with a woman he had met earlier while on a visit to his relatives in Israel by September of that year. Yakov and Rita's relationship had irreversibly deteriorated by 1994. As Yakov continued to pursue his job as a cancer researcher, Rita's technology company was on the verge of bankruptcy. In a phone call with his father in the fall of 1994, Jacob revealed that his 25-year marriage to Rita was disintegrating. Yakov Glusman filed for divorce in December 1995, not too long after. Rita turned down his kind offer of a divorce. The ECI technology company became a focal point throughout their divorce procedures. While Jacob insisted on thoroughly examining the company's finances before agreeing to any conditions, Rita desired exclusive ownership of the business. When Rita heard this, she was horrified. Yakov claimed marital cruelty as the reason he started the divorce. Tragically, the couple's 25-year-old son died 4 months later in 1996 while serving in the Israeli army, further solidifying their already shaky bond. Rita was becoming more and more desperate, and people noticed that she was acting strangely. Even after Yakov gave her $90,000 when he moved out a year earlier in 1995, she found it difficult to control her cravings for luxury. Rita Glusman engaged a private investigator to look for any negative information on Yakov in an effort to put an end to the divorce. She even threatened to use the AIDS virus to poison Yakov's fiancée, resorting to illegal measures like monitoring his phone. Rita Guzman started making plans to kill him after these failed to stop the divorce. Another blow to her reputation came when she was apprehended for theft when it was discovered that she had been taking small goods from a New Jersey pharmacy. Her business kept failing, and as charges were made back and forth, the divorce process grew more intense. Rita was prepared to include her cousin Zalanin because she had already made a clear decision. Despite its simplicity, her strategy was extremely cruel. Rita got a key to her former husband's apartment in the months before Easter. During one of their arguments, she persuaded him to hand it to her and had it copied. She was aware of her ex-husband's schedule, which included him spending Saturday nights at the lab and coming home at 11:30 p.m., recognizing that Rita made sure they had every equipment they would require: a hacksaw, a scalpel, a knife, and an abundance of cleaning supplies. Just hours before Yakov was scheduled to return home, on April 6, 1996, Rita and Salonen drove from Bergen County in a late Model 4 Taurus that was registered to her employer. They parked close to Yakov's apartment in a dimly lighted neighborhood and waited in silence in the living room. Yakov parked his Nissan Maxima in his designated location and went inside his flat around 11:30 p.m. At that point, Zalanen struck first with an axe. He couldn't see exactly where he hit Yakov in the dark, but the scientists fell to the ground. Rita then attacked her husband with ferocity and deadly force. Her axe slid once and struck Zalanen's right hand, causing constant bleeding. Rita emphasized that they would examine Zalanen's injuries later, as they did not have time to spare. She reached into her former husband's chest and took a knife out of the bag to make sure he wasn't still alive. They carried his lifeless body into the restroom and proceeded to dismember it. Rita was determined that not a single fragment of the man could be recognized. They removed his lips and nose to ensure that anyone who might find the body could never identify him. And they even chopped off his fingertips to prevent fingerprint identification. Rita went on a cleaning binge, trying to get rid of any signs of the crime, while Zalini carried on dismembering the corpse. On April 7th, 1996, at 3 in the morning, Kathy Armstrong, a neighbor who lived one story below Yakov, was the only one to hear something thudding and banging. She had no idea that they were packing 9 plastic rubbish bags full of Yakov's bloodied clothes and remaining body pieces for disposal. Another bag had the instruments needed for the grisly task. The bags were then placed inside the 2 automobiles' trunks. After that, Zalini would go back to East Rutherford, dispose of Guzman's body in the Passaic River, and remove the automobile before the sun rose. However, something went wrong. They had not kept to their schedule. Dalneen unintentionally set off the theft alarm on one of the automobiles while he was loading it. If anyone in the apartment building heard the alarm, they didn't care to look into it because it was only a fleeting will in the night. Rita, however, became frightened, leaped into the vehicle, and told Selena to go fast. They circled the area for a while before hesitantly making their way back to the apartment complex, checking that everything was clear and getting back to their serious business. Not only that, but it took longer than Rita had thought to dismember Yakov and clean his apartment. The necessity to tend to Zalanin's hand wound, which resulted from Rita's aggressive behavior towards her husband, caused even more disruption to the planned schedule. Zalanin and Rita stopped at the CVS pharmacy in the town of Fairlawn while driving south. The $32 worth of bandages Rita bought was captured on camera by surveillance. The crime scene at Yakov Guzman's Pearl River apartment was reviewed by authorities, and it soon became evident that this was anything than a simple murder case. Even though the investigators found some strange forensic evidence, it had not yet been tested. Even after testing, there was no certainty that Rita would be directly implicated in the crime based on the evidence. If the police could locate a stray fingerprint that belonged to Rita, they knew that a good defense lawyer could get it thrown out by linking it to one of the couple's frequent fights. Zalanin's confession was the only solid evidence the police had at this point. This was a problem, though, because New York state law stated that the testimony of an accomplice could not be the basis for a murder conviction unless it was bolstered by other witnesses or strong evidence, both of which were not present at this time. Rita's lawyer, Michael Rosen, attempted to get bail the day after her arrest by pointing out the unique circumstances of the case. The judge denied bail, raising the potential of murder charges, which led Rosen to file a felony examination. To keep Rita detained without bond, prosecutors had to demonstrate to a jury that she was dangerous and that there was a chance she would run away again. Rosen was successful because Rita departed for jail after posting a $250,000 bond, and the police were unable to produce enough proof. However, everything changed when an FBI agent called. Unexpectedly, Rosen was ordered to take Rita to the U.S. federal court in White Plains. Rosen was perplexed as to why the federal government was becoming involved because this was unexpected. The cause was evident as soon as Rosen and Rita arrived. Michael Rosen had been preoccupied with getting Rita bail, but in the meantime, local officials had worked with federal prosecutors to devise a novel charge strategy against her for her role in her husband's death. Federal prosecutors utilized the Violence Against Women Act of 1994, a domestic violence legislation, in a succinct 4-page complaint. It was a brave thing to do. This law permitted federal intervention in cases of domestic abuse across state lines, a strategy that had never before been used against a woman, but it gave the authorities the power they needed to bring Rita to justice. Notably, it gave them permission to utilize Zalanin's evidence. Later, Zalanin described in court how they dismembered Yakov and how the entire thing happened. Further evidence was presented by the police, including eyewitness reports from Yakov's neighbors who saw a couple floating bags into a car on April 7, 1996, at 3 in the morning. Rita was the agitated woman buying bandages and antiseptic at 4 a.m. the same morning, according to a drugstore clerk. In addition, a private detective that Rita used to spy on her spouse and his mistress acknowledged her tendency toward dominance. More than a year and a half after Yakov's passing, on April 30, 1997, Rita appeared before U.S. District Court Judge Barrington Parker. She adamantly denied killing her spouse. However, the jury was persuaded by Zalanin's testimony and concluded that she had killed Yakov, dismembered him, and intended to throw him into the river. She was given a life sentence in jail by the judge. The woman, who was formerly praised as a symbol of liberation for a whole social class in the Soviet Union, was now imprisoned. Vladimir received a sentence of 25.5 years in jail later in May 1997. Rita Guzman was compassionately released from prison in 2020 as a result of her deteriorating health, which included many strokes and early-stage Parkinson's disease. Although Yakov's brother wrote a letter opposing Rita's release, expressing shock and terror, the judge took Rita's request for a second chance to escape dying in jail into consideration. The judge allowed Rita to be released despite reservations, and she went back to her house. A failed marriage dealt a devastating blow to Yakov Guzman's life. The unfortunate aspect is that his wife, who was formerly viewed as a symbol of freedom, was to blame. Rather than coming to a mutually beneficial agreement, their relationship descended into chaos. Moving on to the next case. Mike Warner. Mike Warner, then 19 years old, left his house at 5 in the morning on December 2nd, 1988, in Three Rivers, St. Joseph County, Michigan, to work at the local market. He left for home around 10 hours later at 3:30 p.m. following a long workday. However, he sensed a problem when he arrived at his front doorstep. There was an open front door. The sound of a wailing baby greeted him as soon as he walked into the house. He started up the stairs to see how the infant was doing. However, he noticed a blood stain on the stairs railing before he could see the infant. Fearing the worst, he hurried to the baby's nursery and saw his fiancée's 9-month-old daughter in her cot, clean and wearing a brand new diaper. He knew deep down that his fiancée would never leave her infant wailing unnecessarily. He descended the stairs once again and went inside their ground floor bedroom. What he saw inside was a terrifying scene. Blood soaked the area, leaving stains on the walls and floor. Kathy Sue Swartz, his 19-year-old fiancée, lay dead on the bedroom floor. Mike rushed to the neighbor's apartment and called 911, terrified that the person who had done this might still be there. Officer Tom Brinkman and Deputy Sergeant Stark were the first to arrive at the horrific scene. With his 14 years of service, Officer Brinkman had never seen a murder scene this covered with blood. To put it succinctly, there was only one word: brutal. Deputy Sergeant Stark didn't take long to act. He made a request for a forensic team to gather crucial evidence by getting in touch with the Michigan State Police Crime Lab in Grand Rapids. At the same time, he requested that Mike Warner sign a consent form authorizing a comprehensive search of his residence. Mike did not hesitate to sign the consent form. The crime scene was secured by Deputy Sergeant Stark and Officer Tom Brinkman. Lieutenant Stone from the crime lab called Deputy Sergeant Stark a few minutes later to let him know that a team was being put together and would be there shortly. After a short period, the Michigan State Police formally took over the case when the state police showed up with their forensic squad. The crime lab carefully examined the scene after the crime to collect important evidence. A pink GTE phone that was discovered on the waterbed was one of the objects taken as evidence. Although one of the phone's fingerprints was positively identified as Kathy Swartz's, the other fingerprint, which was stained a reddish-brown color, was found to be human blood. Although the identity of the bloody fingerprint remained a mystery, it was sufficient for the FBI database. There was not a match when they ran the print through the AFIS database. When the forensic team searched the residence, they found a trail of Kathy's blood that coated every surface. They also discovered bloodstains left by the attacker all around the area. To add to the unsettling situation, they discovered bloody writings on Kathy's leg as well as throughout the house. All locations and the entire text were never made public, although one message said, "I was here." Mike Warner thought back to the terror. It was splattered over walls, furniture, everything. It was almost like it was painted on. The crime's darkness appeared to have no boundaries. When they found the invader's bloody footprint on the bathroom's tile floor, the inquiry took a dark turn. The fact that their offender was barefoot in such bitter cold in December seemed strange to them. In this bitterly cold weather, why would anyone take off their shoes? The most terrifying theory that the investigators could come up with was that the intruder had removed the blood from the victim's restroom, thereby leaving a macabre trace of the terrible incidents that had taken place. The neighbors of Kathy in the apartment building were contacted by the police. Surprisingly, a couple of them remembered seeing a man and a woman hanging around her residence that day. The investigators had more questions than answers when composite sketches were made, but the identities of the two remained a mystery. The investigators deduced that the perpetrator had to be someone Kathy knew, since there were no indications of forced entry. They started to suspect Mike Warner. Mike was called in to be questioned, and the detectives questioned him non-stop. Even law enforcement personnel in unmarked automobiles were tailing Mike. Their presence turned into a continual cause of stress. Even though Mike's fingerprints were found at the scene, his own house, they did not prove that he was involved. Mike told the interrogation team where he had been that terrible day. Around 5 in the morning, he had left the apartment taking his daughter and his fiancée Kathy Sue Swartz with him. Kathy remained at home to finish her laundry. He heard the baby cry and came back in the afternoon to find his fiancée dead. He ran to phone the police, terrified that the offender might still be in their house. After his employment provided confirmation of his alibi, he was ultimately exonerated of all charges as the case's suspect. He had a good relationship with Kathy, and there were no known problems between them. Mike explained that the previous evening they had decorated a Christmas tree. Recently, Kathy and Mike's love journey took a big turn when they announced their engagement and 6-month wedding date. Mike had bought the rings already. Kathy was a sweet and compassionate person who spent her days taking care of her daughter at home. Her hobbies were diverse, including a fondness for tomboyish pursuits like fishing, hunting, and camping. She had no past drug or alcohol usage, and her character was spotless. Everyone who knew her said she had no enemies that they knew of. It wasn't just Mike Warner who was being scrutinized by the authorities. As a matter of fact, all of their close acquaintances and relatives ended up on the suspect list. They had to produce their footprints and fingerprints, all of them. The investigators collected these prints methodically, one by one, scrutinizing each person and weeding out possible suspects. A startling discovery was uncovered by the medical examiners. Kathy had 3 severe gashes on her throat, many stab wounds, and evidence of physical strangling. Her hypoxia and blood loss were the causes of her death. In addition, the medical examiner discovered cuts on both hands, indicating that she had courageously retaliated. This vicious attack had a very evident motive. An unidentified man desired to hurt her. The blood spatter study revealed a terrifying tale. The fight started in the kitchen downstairs, went upstairs to the baby's room, and then came back downstairs. All of them led to the bedroom, the terrible place where Kathy's life ended. Though Kathy had heroically battled, her end was inevitable. Detectives received a lead 2 days after discovering Kathy's body. A suspect was arrested by the police on December 4th. Troy Schultz, an 18-year-old, was Kathy's previous romantic partner. Troy insisted that he had been at work that day and had gone dancing with his new girlfriend afterward, denying any role in the incident. His alibi was supported by numerous witnesses, and he even passed a polygraph exam. Yet he was not freed from arrest and was kept in jail. They compared Troy's voluntarily donated blood with that from the crime site on December 8th. The test produced a significant discovery. The blood found at the crime scene did not match Troy's blood. He was freed a week later, having at last been exonerated of all charges. Following his acquittal, Schulteis brought a wrongful incarceration case. Investigators pursued every lead they could find. Despite questioning and testing more than 5,000 people, none of them could match the blood they discovered at the crime scene. The police agency was burdened by the passage of time. Despite carefully gathering thousands of fingerprints and footprints, not a single match was found. A profile of the likely culprit was built with assistance from the FBI's experts at the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. FBI profilers said that the offender was local and might even be related to the victim. It was a horrific scene that would stay with every police officer on the force for a very long time. Many an officer's career was spent trying to solve it, but after 35 years the case fell cold. Detective Sam Smallcombe was then given this unsolved case in 2022. When investigator Smallcombe made the decision to use forensic genetic genealogy in an attempt to locate a lead, the investigation advanced significantly. The culprit's DNA was sent to Othram Lab in 2022 for advanced examination. Technology of today revived the search for closure. They found a family with 4 sons thanks to Othram Lab's DNA analysis. Though he was not a match, one of them was already listed in the National Criminal Database. The brothers who were in the 2nd and 3rd ranks also offered their resignation. There was an advance in the case, just when it appeared to be lost for good. The 53-year-old Robert Odell Waters, the 4th brother, had an identical DNA match. Robert Waters' DNA was recovered on April 30th, 2023, thanks to a search order. It matched Kathy's pink phone's bloody fingerprint that was recovered from the crime scene. That following day, The Beaufort Police Department took him into custody. As it happened, Mike Warner was well acquainted with Waters. They had been friends from boyhood, sharing a wealth of experiences, same classes, and even many late nights spent by Waters at Mike Warner's house while they were students. Although Kathy went to a different school, Mike and Robert Waters finally crossed paths with each other a month before Kathy's untimely death. Waters saw Kathy for the first time when Mike invited him into his house. The three of them spent hours together, not realizing the tragedy that was about to consume their lives. The case files already contained the name Robert Odell Waters. Before the carnage, Mike had revealed that Waters had been staying at their residence recently, but the cops had not been keeping an eye on him. The FBI profile suggested that the offender would be a local resident, so that's who the cops were hunting for. 3 months before to the incident, in September 1988, Waters relocated to South Carolina, according to the records. Waters moved to Beaufort County, South Carolina, a good distance from the crime location, and he had no criminal history. He was never suspected by the investigators. It became evident why this oversight occurred. Out of the 10,000 pages in the case files, his name only appeared once. Records indicate that Waters had not been involved in any known criminal activity prior to or following his attack on Kathy. Robert Odell Waters was happily married when he was discovered to be the criminal. He had accomplished significant success in life, was well liked by his family, and was well respected in the neighborhood. He lived in a house worth $500,000 and co-managed a profitable plumbing business with his spouse. He now found himself in the South Carolina Beaufort County Detention Center, awaiting extradition to Michigan to answer for his crimes. But on the morning of May 6, 2023, something occurred at the Beaufort County Detention Center little than a week after his detention. Bradley had been employed by the Beaufort County Detention Center for the last 2 years. He was an experienced prison officer with roughly 18 years of experience working at other detention facilities. Her shift started at approximately 11:45 p.m. on May 5, 2023, and during the shift change at 12 o'clock and 8 seconds a.m., she started the inmate count. Bradley went up the stairs to cell A240 while making her rounds. She found prisoner Waters lying down on the floor with a sheet over his neck when she turned on the light. She quickly notified other members of the BCDC team and issued a code blue for a medical emergency. Bradley went inside cell 240 with CO Larry Shaw, took off the sheet that was over Waters' neck, and laid him flat on his back. They started CPR and continued it until the nurses showed up. Then he told Bradley and Shaw to get out of the cell. The last time Waters had been checked on, according to CO Shaw, was about 11:24 p.m. during a security watch. Bradley's face had gone crimson, and he felt cold to the touch when he found Waters during her count. Mike Warner expressed his opinion that Waters chose a simple route. Mike was devastated by the loss. He would often stop by Kathy's grave with roses, which were her favorite flowers. Mike, who is 53 years old, has never married, battled alcoholism, had trouble finding a job, and still resides with his mother. His sister informed him that they had identified the accountable man. His sister added, "I woke him up and told him. He only gave me a bewildered expression. It was beyond his belief." After their sad daughter's death, Kathy's parents, Audrey and David, were granted custody of their granddaughter, Courtney. Courtney is a mother of 4 now, age 35. Audrey went suddenly in 2012 without ever learning who had attacked her. And in 2022, David went out as well, taking his unsolved questions to his grave. The unacknowledged admission of guilt in Waters' death serves as a terrifying reminder of his sinister secret. He must have grown intolerably burdened by his crime, for he had lived with its knowledge. He was the breadwinner, the parent, and the husband that his wife and family had known their entire lives. Abruptly, he vanished, taking the facade of normalcy with it. The weight of ending a life proved to be too much for him to handle, so he took the simple route in an effort to save his loved ones from the embarrassment and disgrace. The Sims family, Dr. Robert Sims and his wife Helen, were at home with their 12-year-old daughter on October 22, 1966, when they turned on the radio to watch a college football game between Florida State University and Mississippi State. Additionally, the Simses had two elder daughters, Judy and Jeannie, but they were watching families who had attended the game. It was assumed that neither girl would return home until late at night. When Jeannie returned home at around 11 p.m., the place was strangely silent. The main bedroom held her parents and younger sister. Each one was secured with the same meticulously knotted knots. Joy had been repeatedly shot and stabbed, while Richard and Helen had been shot. The only person who had survived the onslaught was Helen, but she passed out before she could explain what had happened. A few days later, she passed away in the hospital. Trick-or-treating was canceled in Tallahassee in 1966 as a result of the Sims case. Armed with ammonia spray bottles, young women sought protection for themselves. Interestingly, both Robert and Helen had been blindfolded, and their home exhibited no traces of forced entry, despite the fact that no one could think of any enemies the Sims might have had. The family's recognized pastor, C.A. Roberts, emerged as the case's principal suspect. Roberts was found to be having multiple affairs with the ladies in the area. Remarkably, Helen worked as Roberts' secretary at First Baptist Church until she abruptly quit a few days prior to her murder. Some claim Roberts was pursuing her. Some claim she just knew too much about what was happening at First Baptist Church. But Roberts had a strong alibi. He was observed at the Florida State University football game that day and worked for the team. A young man neighbor emerged as a more intriguing possibility. Investigators suspect the killer entered the house from the one behind the victim's residence, where he resided. He was seeing a young lady who was allegedly obsessed with death and who would frequently break into the local funeral businesses, steal funeral shrouds, sleep in them, and bother the owners. She followed the investigation with an uncommon fascination. The murder of Sims, however, is still unsolved since the suspects were never questioned. Moving on to the next case. Victoria Jane Collins. In Lake Township, Ohio, on December 20th, 1996, a Union 76 narcotics stop discovered a woman's body. The woman was soon recognized as Cleveland, Ohio resident Victoria Jane Collins, 27. A few days prior, she was last observed leaving a Cleveland area pub with two guys and a woman. After being beaten, Victoria went into cardiac arrest and died. Her friends and family, as well as the individual she was last seen with, were questioned by the police. But it didn't get them any closer to identifying the person who had injured her. At the scene of the crime, they gathered the suspect's DNA evidence. A 51-year-old man named Samuel Legg was taken into custody in Medina County in 2019 in connection with a separate unsolved case. When Samuel was detained, he was required to provide a DNA sample. His DNA was discovered to match the DNA discovered at a crime scene in the Victoria Collins case by detectives when they entered it into their database. But that wasn't all. Additionally, his DNA connected him to an unsolved case in Illinois' Lake County. Additionally, it appears likely that he was involved in Mahoning County and Wood County cold cases. At the time of the offenses, Samuel was a resident of Ohio and a former truck driver in the Midwest. On a $1 million bond, he was extradited from Arizona to Medina County. He is currently being held in Ohio for his trial. The resolution of this case took 24 years. Attorney General Dave Yost of Ohio stated that his crimes have been gradually revealed thanks to the persistent efforts of law enforcement and state-of-the-art DNA testing. Moving on to the next case. Dulcia Mejia. In 2004, Dulcia Mejia, at 16 years old, resided in Miami-Dade County. She shared a home with Raul Mara, her stepfather, and Delcia Oliva, her mother. Delcia was a Miami Beach high school student. Her mother last saw her that evening on September 16, 2004. Just after 5 p.m., Oliva left the house for work without checking on her daughter. Raul called a 911 operator in a panic about 4 hours later, reporting that he had found his stepdaughter's lifeless body when he got home. According to his account, He left the house just before 8 a.m. and found her deceased around 90 minutes later. When questioned at the time, Raul said he had nothing to do with the matter. The fact that he and Delcia did not get along was widely known. Raul was clearly injured, with bruises and scratches. He said that as he was dialing 911, he fell onto a dresser. The fact that nothing was taken and there were no indications of forced entry confused the investigators as well. Following the event, Raul moved to California and Oliva ended their relationship. Oliva has always held Raul accountable for the slashing of Dulcia's throat. Investigators did discover DNA under her fingernails that belonged to the individual who killed her. It was entered into the Cody's database by the investigators, but no matches were found. The case was abandoned since there were no more leads. 2020 saw a significant advancement in DNA technology, and in 2004, investigators chose to compare DNA recovered from a crime scene to Raul's DNA. The results showed a positive match. In September 2020, Raul was taken into custody in Watsonville, California. On September 28th, he stabbed himself to death with a pin while awaiting extradition to Miami-Dade County. Moving on to the next case. Sherry Black. Sherry Black, 64, was a resident of South Salt Lake, Utah. She owned a company named BMW Books and Billiards. She worked on November 30th, 2010. One day, a client entered the office with bad intentions. The client repeatedly stabbed and beat Sherry. Later, her body was discovered inside the shop. An Armani Exchange men's belt measuring around 36 inches around the waist was discovered at the crime site. Significantly, the suspect's blood was also discovered at the crime scene. It was a cold case for years. Subsequently, in 2017, South Salt Lake Police requested assistance from Parabon Nanolabs in order to create a phenotypic composite of the suspect using DNA samples taken from the scene. Investigators and Parabon Nanolabs labored diligently for several years to identify the person whose DNA was discovered at the crime scene. After much inquiry, they located Adam Durbero, 29. They took a DNA sample from him in October 2020 in order to do more tests. Then, it was established that his DNA and the DNA discovered at the crime scene matched. He had barely turned 19 when the crime was committed. Investigators discovered that Adam had posted on Facebook 2 years after Sherry's death, claiming to have taken someone's life. The bookstore was less than a mile away from his home. When Adam was younger, he got into trouble multiple times. As an adult, he has continued to have a little criminal record, according to court documents. Adam admitted to the crime after being taken into custody by the police. He is being held at a Salt Lake County jail without being allowed to post bond. The detectives observed how hard it was to find Adam. Since he was adopted, it was nearly hard to use DNA to locate him. His social media accounts demonstrated that he battled personal troubles from his childhood, had a strained relationship with his adoptive father, and had done time in jail. Adam's family received the news with great sadness. They released a communique. "We never imagined that something that happened over 10 years ago would have involved a member of our family. It was a horrifying and devastating occurrence. Our hearts are broken by the apparent part played by our son Adam in this incident, but all we can do is offer our sympathies to Sherry Black's family, friends, and loved ones." Moving on to the next case. Arliss Perry. In order to live with her spouse Bruce Perry, a sophomore at Stanford University, 19-year-old Arliss Perry of Bismarck, North Dakota, relocated to Stanford, California. While strolling around campus on October 12, 1974, Arliss and Bruce got into a little altercation regarding the tire pressure of their automobile. Arliss went on her own to the Stanford Memorial Church after deciding she needed some time to herself. Just before midnight, she entered the church. Crawford, the security guy, said that he shut down the church just after midnight. When Crawford checked the church later at around 2 in the morning, he told police that he discovered all the doors closed. Meanwhile, Bruce was beginning to feel concerned. Arla was still nowhere to be found. Bruce drove around campus at 3 in the morning in search of her before calling the police. Upon inspecting the church, they discovered that the doors remained shut. Crawford noticed that the west side of the church entrance was ajar when he arrived to open the church at approximately 5:45 a.m. It was compelled from within. He found Arlice's body beneath a pew as he entered, with her legs spread wide. She laid on her back, nude from the waist down. The trousers she usually wore had been taken off and were reportedly placed on top of her legs in the opposite direction. She had been sexually abused with a candlestick, but had not been raped. She slipped another candlestick between her breasts. An ice pick discovered embedded in her skull caused blows to the back of her head, which ultimately resulted in her death. Semen traces were found on a kneeling pillow, and a palm print was observed on one of the candles. Only 6 of the 7 individuals who entered the building that evening, including Arlice and the guard, could be recognized. Given the murder scene and Arlice's peculiar orientation, some have hypothesized that her death was a part of a satanic ritual. In his 1987 book, The Ultimate Evil, journalist Maury Terry postulated that the murderer was a friend of notorious serial killer David Berkowitz, Sam's son. When Berkowitz submitted a book to the North Dakota authorities in 1979, he claimed to have scribbled in the margin, Arlice Perry, hunted, stalked, slain, followed to California's Stanford University. In prison, Berkowitz testified that he was a member of a satanic cult that he joined in 1975 and that he killed with other members, at least one of whom was from North Dakota. But when investigators spoke with him in prison, he said he had nothing useful to offer. Bruce, Arlice's spouse, was also exonerated. During an interview with police, security guard Stephen Crawford stated that he had locked up the church at midnight and called someone inside to make sure no late-night worshipers were there. He claimed to have searched the premises after learning of Arlice's disappearance and to have discovered the victim's body. Crawford's DNA was later collected by police as well. However, DNA testing was not available in criminal cases until the middle of the 1980s, and it was not until the last 10 years that law enforcement started employing more sensitive DNA tests more frequently. The case was never formally ended. It was open and ongoing for many years. Thanks to advancements in DNA testing, authorities have been able to establish a connection between Crawford and the murder in recent months. More than 40 years later, Crawford was contacted for a series of interviews. The DNA evidence soon gained sufficient strength to secure a search warrant for Crawford's San Jose flat. Stephen Crawford's flat door was knocked on June 28, 2018, at approximately 9:04 a.m. They spoke to him verbally via the closed door. They observed him holding a firearm as they went inside the flat. When the officers noticed the gun and heard a single shot, they withdrew and Crawford turned the revolver on himself, ending his life. At the scene, Crawford was pronounced deceased. Upon searching the man's flat, investigators discovered a disorganized suicide note from 2 years ago and a copy of The Ultimate Evil, a book by Maury Terry that looked into a sinister cult and included information about the unresolved Arlice Perry case in its first chapter. Stephen Crawford chose to avoid taking accountability for his acts by choosing the cowardly route, even though he was aware that the police were becoming more interested in him as a suspect. Moving on to the next case. Natasha Alex Carter. On December 22, 1989, Susan Gale Carter gave birth to her daughter Natasha Alex Carter. Her life was marked by a complicated family history that would be brutally altered on August 8, 2000, when she and her 41-year-old mother, Susan, disappeared unexpectedly. She was known to her loved ones by her middle name, Alex. Natasha was born into a world full with uncertainty and oncoming turbulence, but her early years were clouded by the turbulent custody dispute between her parents, Ricky Lafferty and Susan Gale Carter. Discord plagued the couple's relationship, made worse by Susan's diagnosis of bipolar disorder, for which she refused treatment. But when Susan was discovered hanging out with other guys, the couple's relationship came to an end, and she eventually fell in love with Larry Del Webb, their landlord. Susan and Larry made the decision to wed in 1998. And even though Susan continues to struggle with her mental health, she was able to obtain custody of Natasha because of Larry's powerful connections. What transpired was a bitter and intense court battle between Susan and Ricky for Natasha's custody. When Susan allegedly threatened Ricky Lafferty during a mediation meeting by saying he would never see Natasha again, the custody dispute took a darker turn. When Susan did not show up for the next court, Ricky was given custody. Susan and Natasha's lives took an unexpected turn on August 8, 2000, when they disappeared without a trace. In the months preceding her disappearance, Natasha, who was just 10 years old at the time, had not spoken to her father Ricky. When Ricky became worried and decided to contact Susan's new husband, Larry, to find out where his daughter was, he received a confusing response. When Larry first replied, he said that Susan and Natasha had gone out with a man named Jose, but that they would be back soon. But when Ricky called Larry again a few days later, feeling apprehensive this time, he was told a different narrative. Larry said, this time, Susan and Natasha were gone, with a man named Manuel. The mystery was further complicated by the person's constant name changes. Given Susan's statement that she would make sure Ricky never saw his daughter again, detectives believed Susan had abducted Natasha. Natasha's grandma, who thought that she was terrified of her mother and did not want to live with her, confirmed this notion. Following their disappearance, on November 13, 2000, Susan Gail Carter was charged with kidnapping and a felony warrant was issued for her. The original story described Natasha as the kidnapping victim of a family member and speculated that she might be with her mother and an older male. The difficulty in finding them was exacerbated by worries that they might have crossed state lines. The case has remained unsolved over the years, with no solid leads or noteworthy discoveries. Ricky Lafferty, Natasha's father, never gave up hope that he would one day be reunited with his daughter. Even after 20 years had gone, the case was far from lost or thought to be unsolvable. Authorities remained dedicated to uncovering the truth and making sure Natasha and her family received justice, even though the case attracted virtually little attention from the media. The FBI increased the reward in 2021 for critical information that would reveal Natasha or her mother Susan's whereabouts. Law enforcement officials discovered the same year that Susan might also be going by the alias Susan Gail Carter Webb. However, when the case showed no signs of improvement, detectives started to consider the idea that what they had initially thought to be a kidnapping could actually have been the result of foul activity. The primary suspect in Natasha's disappearance, Susan Gail Carter, was no longer the subject of the inquiry. According to recently discovered evidence by the West Virginia State Police, Susan and Natasha vanished inexplicably at the same time. The West Virginia State Police said in a statement that Natasha Carter was abducted by Susan Carter at first. However, it has come to light throughout this investigation that Susan Carter and Natasha Carter are also missing, having vanished on August 8, 2000. The whole story of their disappearance was altered by this discovery. When West Virginia authorities focused on Larry Del Webb's home at the 100 block of Kyle Lane, where Susan and Natasha were residing at the time of their disappearances, the case took an unexpected turn. The FBI began a comprehensive examination of the property in August 2023 in an attempt to find information pertaining to Natasha and Susan's disappearances. Now 80 years old, Webb claimed to have memory loss and dementia. At a press conference conducted when the FBI was investigating, Webb seemed perplexed by the unexpected entry into his house. He asserted that he didn't understand why the police were searching his property, but when the name Natasha was brought up, he did admit to being somewhat familiar, and he said he thought they were married when Susan was brought up. He also mentioned, in a fairly disjointed recall, that the mother and daughter had inexplicably gone while he was away on a trip. The live-in caregiver for Webb, Terry Lilly, revealed that the FBI search resulted in an unexpected finding. It was reported, though it hasn't been verified, that police discovered a bullet in the bedroom wall that purportedly had Natasha's DNA. The basement floor's tiles were also taken out by the authorities. Larry Del Webb was accused of first-degree murder of Natasha in October 2023. This was a major development in the case. Notably, Webb has not been charged in relation to Susan's disappearance, therefore that aspect of the case remains unsolved. There is still ambiguity about Natasha and Susan's final destiny because they are still unaccounted for despite these revelations. Webb is awaiting trial while the probe is still underway. Moving on to the next case. The Springfield 3. The abduction of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall from their home in Springfield, Missouri, on June 7, 1992, marked the beginning of the unresolved case known as the Springfield 3, which concerns the disappearance of 3 individuals. The whereabouts of their remains or the location of their remains has never been found. Their last known location was at approximately 2 in the morning on June 7th, when they were leaving the residence of a friend. Because the home became too crowded, they made the decision to leave the party and travel to Suzanne's mother's house instead of spending the night at their friend's house, where they had planned to spend the night during the night. Cheryl Levitt was a single mother who was extremely devoted to her daughter, Suzanne. She worked as a hairdresser at a neighborhood salon, and she was a mother to her daughter. All 3 of the women vanished at some time between the hours of 2 and 8 in the morning. At approximately 8 in the morning, a friend of the girls from their high school came to the residence in search of them. The globe that was hanging over the porch light was broken, and the front door was open when she arrived. All indications of criminal activity were absent, with the exception of the shattered light fixture. There were handbags and cigarettes belonging to the woman inside the house, and the dog that belonged to the household appeared to be very anxious. It appeared that the beds had been occupied by someone. During the time that the young lady was still inside the house seeking for her companions, the telephone picked up. After the young woman hung up, the caller was a male who continued to make sexually suggestive and obscene statements. The male returned the call, but the woman became so terrified that she ran out of the house. When Stacy's mother arrived at the residence later that afternoon in search of her daughter, she discovered the same peculiar scenario that she had seen before. In order to report the 3 women who were missing, she called the police. Despite their best efforts, the detectives were unable to uncover any significant clues. An individual by the name of Robert Craig Cox, who had a history of being convicted of kidnapping and robbery, was one of the initial suspicions. He went so far as to assert that he was aware that the women had been slain and buried, and he asserted that their bodies would under no circumstances be discovered. On the other hand, his alibi was verified because, on June 7th, he was staying at the residence on which his parents resided. For the crime of aggravated robbery, Cox is currently spending time in a prison in the state of Texas. The parking garage at the Cox Hospital, which was still under construction at the time that the 3 ladies vanished, has also been pointed up to the authorities by a number of tips. The parking garage was scanned by a recognized mechanical engineer who specializes in ground penetration radar, which was hired by a reporter who was intrigued about the situation. There were 3 irregularities discovered in a single tiny section of the parking lot. The engineer was unable to confirm that these were in fact bodies. However, he did state that they were strikingly similar to the things he had observed in a cemetery. However, the police are still not convinced, and they are refusing to have a core sample taken from the concrete until they are convinced otherwise. There is no one who knows what happened to Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy, and I believe that we can all agree that it is highly weird that all 3 ladies vanished at the same particular time. Moving on to the next case. Robin Brooks. In April 1980, 20-year-old Robin Brooks resided in Sacramento, California. She moved there from New York and only stayed for 6 months. She started working as a clerk at Donut Time, a restaurant serving donuts. Robin worked her normal job at Donut Time until just after midnight on April 24, 1980. She was supposed to get together for a pool date with her buddies, but she never did. Robin failed to show up for work the following day as well. After growing concerned, one of her friends visited her flat. After breaking in, he discovered Robin's lifeless body in her bedroom. She suffered many stab wounds and assaults. At the scene of the incident, investigators discovered the attacker's DNA. Although it was stored in a database, no one could match it. There were no immediate suspects in 1980, and the investigation was closed. Subsequently, in order to solve this issue, Sergeant Mickey Links turned to genetic genealogy in 2016. They eventually came across Philip Lee Wilson, 71. Wilson resided fewer than 2 miles away from Robin at the time of the incident. It's unknown if the two individuals were acquainted. In 1985, Wilson was charged with assault and battery in Sacramento County. He had encounters with Texas police as well. Exactly 40 years after Robin's death, in April 2020, Wilson was hauled into custody at his Hagenwood neighborhood house in North Sacramento. Wilson is being held at the main jail in Sacramento County without access to bail. "We never forget the victims," said to Scott Jones, the Sacramento County Sheriff. That's actually all we think about in many ways. These cases are never forgotten, even if they occasionally take a little longer to resolve than others. None of them are kept in storage indefinitely. Maria, the sister of Robin, remarked that this is a bittersweet anniversary. Hopefully, this arrest will inspire hope in other victims of unsolved crimes. Robin, I know, is grinning and saying, "Well done." Dr. Gaines Huey. Dr. Gaines Huey, a Walton dentist, left for work on June 5, 1976 in Union, Kentucky, as usual. As he was traveling along Chambers Road, he noticed a dead adolescent girl's body by the side of the road, close to a culvert. The State Police of Kentucky were contacted. Trooper Jan Washner and his squad from the Walton State Police Department arrived on the scene at approximately 7:15 a.m. Although there were several wounds and bruises on the victim's body, the head wound was the most severe. Deep strangling marks surrounding the neck were also found by the investigators. As they investigated the crime scene, they found flattened grass and shattered twigs. The body had obviously been dragged here. The crime site was free of bloodstains. The crime took place at another location. This was only a place to dump stuff. The murderer made absolutely no attempt to conceal the body. It was put out in the open as though he wanted people to find it. Despite searching the area, investigators were unable to locate any clues, fingerprints, or the deadly weapon. Detective Warshner had no leads to pursue in the absence of witnesses or hard proof. After the crime scene investigation produced no results, detectives looked into the victim's body for information. Her body was taken to the lab of the county medical examiner to be autopsied. She had been the victim of a brutal assault, according to the post-mortem results. Extreme force was applied when using a tire iron as a weapon. The victim's face, severely bruised and swollen, was almost unrecognizable. Her skull was clearly severely lacerated. There were obvious indicators of severe physical trauma and genital assault. The cause was identified as manual strangulation asphyxia and blunt force injuries to the head. Just when there was no more hope, the forensic team achieved a breakthrough. On the victim's clothing, they found DNA from another country. However, no match was discovered when the DNA sample was searched through the central database. The case file began to gather dust and eventually went cold as there were no further leads. The girl, who was only 16 years old, met such a cruel end to her life. Carol Sue Claver was her given name. Born and bred in Boone County, Kentucky, Carol Sue Claver joined the world in 1960. As a senior, she went to Dixie Heights High School. Carol Sue was well known for her love of music in addition to being an excellent student. She was a violinist and pianist. She was quite active in the school band, which developed into a big aspect of her life. Carol was not merely a musician and a student. She was a devoted sister as well. Charles and Thomas Claver, her brothers, were very close to her. Carol Sue's father died of heart failure when she was just 10 years old. Although Carol Sue lived a very typical life in a small town, her regular trips to DeValle Park in western Covington, Kentucky, were what really made her stand out. DeValle Park served as her haven, her go-to spot for relaxation, and her social center during a time when face-to-face encounters were the only means of communication. She loved riding her bike and having deep chats with pals here. Carol was well liked by her acquaintances that she met at Duval Park because of her gregarious and charismatic personality. She rode her bike to the park on June 4th at about 5:30 p.m. The plan was to go to Z's Hyde Park restaurant for dinner with pals. But witnesses at the park saw her conversing with a stranger rather than hanging out with her pals. He stood at about 5 feet 10 inches tall, with a thin body and shoulder-length sandy blonde hair. He either drove a Chevy Monte Carlo or an amazing Pontiac Grand Prix. Together, they exited the park. She was observed loading her bicycle into the man's vehicle's trunk. After that, the man took her home, where her neighbors witnessed her removing the bicycle from the vehicle. She entered, but the automobile did not immediately drive off. It was idle in the driveway as it stood there. Carol Sue reappeared a few minutes later, changed into new clothes, and walked out with the same man. She was last observed alive at this location. The authorities notified her family of a body they had found that remarkably resembled Carol Sue when they reported her missing. Thomas, her brother, fearlessly entered the morgue to verify the unbelievable reality. Yes, that was Carol Sue. Days became years, and the Carol Sue case remained unresolved until it finally went cold. Her family and friends could only hope for the answers and closure that were painfully out of reach with every second that went by. Carol Sue's execution offered a ray of hope following years of stillness. Coy Cox and Tina Adams, two cold case investigators, revisited the investigation in 2017. They collaborated with Jerry Keith, the original investigator who was an authority on the Carol Sue case but is now retired. Together, the three of them went through the case file page by page, searching for information from an entirely different angle. Cox and Adams started their search by going over the two suspects Keith had previously pointed out. The initial lead involved a man whose past auto theft history matched Carol's last ever vehicle description. They located him and asked him some questions. It was amazing how helpful the individual was given his criminal record. He did not cower behind a legal team, but he flatly denied any involvement in Carol's murder. He was aware that his past transgressions put him under suspicion, but he steadfastly maintained his innocence in Carol's incident. Adams and Cox requested a DNA test, and he voluntarily supplied a sample. The long wait was over, and the results were released in December 2018. His DNA did not match the foreign material discovered on the girl's clothing. He wasn't the one who did it. In 2020, after eliminating their first suspect, Cox and Adam turned their attention to the second suspect. 2 years after Carol's body was found on October 1st, 1978, their focus narrowed in on an unidentified attacker who had carried out a similar crime in the same area. The victim's continued existence is the only distinction. The victim of the crime on October 1st, 1978, was contacted by the detectives. She described the terrifying incidents of that fateful evening. She was ambushed in her garage on a peaceful, dark evening in Park Hills, Kentucky. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a man grabbed her from behind. A horrific experience that lasted for 2 excruciating hours ensued. She suffered from severe beatings and torture. He had his way with her first. Next, in an attempt to keep her quiet, the assailant repeatedly struck her and burned her with a cigarette. Cox painstakingly went over the records, piecing together the facts. When he discovered a crucial fingerprint on the victim's vehicle, his efforts were rewarded. They were shocked to discover a match when they ran the fingerprints through their system. Michael Dean Tate was the assailant. It was now his 77th birthday. After this information was found, Michael Dean Tate was detained for abusing a lady in a similar manner in 1978. In addition, he was now under intense scrutiny from Cox and Adams due to his possible involvement in the Carol Sue case. Tate frequently traveled to Kentucky in the 1970s and 1980s for employment. Despite his dubious background, he too vehemently denied any role in the murder. The DNA found on Carol did not match Tate's, which dashed the detectives' hopes that they had finally identified the guilty party. In 1976, Tate was firmly located in Cincinnati according to court records, which put the police back at square one. They were still unable to solve this decades-old riddle. Detectives Cox and Adams turned to Othram Labs, a private organization with a special talent for solving the impossible, for assistance in September 2022. Police can use Othram Labs to determine a person's relationship to another person even if they are not closely connected. This is accomplished by means of specialized DNA testing that examines single nucleotide polymorphisms, which are minuscule variations in DNA, and short tandem repeats, which resemble microscopic patterns in DNA. The authorities can use DNA testing to identify potential family members of the attacker. Othram Labs was assigned this mission in September 2022. It took less than 2 months after finance was secured. Results were returned by Othram Labs by November 2022. The culprit's DNA samples were used to establish a genetic connection. Thomas Dunaway is who he is. The only problem was that Thomas Dunaway had already died in 1990. This implies that his DNA could not be directly matched by the police. Yet he had a child who never knew his father. This finding would turn out to be the key to solving the puzzle. To gather DNA samples for comparison, detectives made the trip to see Mr. Dunaway's biological son. The lab yielded an astounding result when comparing the DNA of Dunaway's son with foreign DNA discovered in Carol Sue's clothing 46 years prior. Carol Sue Claver and her family would eventually receive justice in December 2022. Nearly 46 years after the atrocity. The DNA results unequivocally demonstrated that Thomas W. Dunaway was the man they were searching for. When Thomas W. Dunaway took Carol Sue's life, he was just 19 years old. He was able to avoid prosecution for several years, but the cops' unceasing pursuit of him finally caught up with him. Detectives could look into his former life and the crimes he committed now that they had a name. More proof that he resided close to D. Valle Park was discovered. Carol Sue was last spotted here with a man who looked a lot like Dunaway. They discovered more damning evidence as they dug further. Thomas Dunaway did not commit crimes only once. He abandoned the cars he drove and went on a 6-month criminal rampage. Even after Carol Sue Claver passed away, he continued his illegal behavior. Only 6 months after Carol Sue's terrible death, he was also found guilty of taking the life of another individual in Boone County. Ronald Townsend, then 19 years old, was discovered shot and bleeding on the ground on a December night in 1976. He was sent to the hospital after suffering serious injuries. He passed away from his wounds 4 days later, leaving his family in mourning. Dunaway has a history of committing crimes, leaving his cars behind and running from the scene. Detectives found him because of his passion for automobiles. Dunaway purchased a two-tone 1973 Chevrolet Monte Carlo in May 1976. He picked Carol Sue up at the park in the same vehicle. Following Carol Sue's murder, he traded it in for an orange Chevy Vega. He sought safety in Fort Carson after fleeing Union, Kentucky. He was able to distance himself from Carol Sue's case thanks to this car swap. However, the orange Vega he was driving was the vehicle he used to shoot Ronald Townsend. Many witnesses saw the orange Vega that the shooter drove off in, but no one saw who the perpetrator was. The investigator made an effort to find his highly noticeable orange Volkswagen Vega. After a protracted pursuit, he was apprehended in South Carolina on Christmas Eve of 1976 and charged with arson of another person's vehicle and unlawful handgun possession. He entered a guilty plea and was given a life sentence. Sadly, Dunaway's sentence was shortened, and after spending just 7.5 years in prison, he was out early on parole in 1984. There were unsettling parallels between Ronald Townsend's and Carol Sue's horrific murders. It was almost as though the victims were being taunted by the government when they were abandoned in full view next to the roadway. The attacker appeared to be trying to convey a message. In all instances, numerous people spotted the man in question's fancy car, but not the real culprit. A more thorough examination showed that the U.S. Army was not the only organization hunting for Dunaway. In addition to the police, they were also considering him. It's interesting to note that Dunaway joined the Army 9 days after killing Carol Sue. After serving in Fort Knox at first, he was moved to Fort Carson in Colorado. After killing Townsend, Thomas Dunaway left the Army after just 6 months of service and went missing. It's still unclear how Carol Sue Claver and Thomas Dunaway are related. Detectives had nothing except theories. There was no hard proof of how the two of them knew one another. Given that they attended the same schools in the Erlanger-Ellesmere Schools District, it was possible that they were friends from childhood or schoolmates. However, if that had been the case, Dunaway would have been recognized at the park by someone. Davo Park may have the key to the mystery, according to Detective Cox. Given Carol's reputation for being outgoing, it's likely that Dunaway and her initial encounter occurred there. Perhaps that night she went on her first date with Dunaway. If Dunaway had still been alive, investigators could have charged him with Carol Sue's execution based on the hard DNA evidence they had against him. Nevertheless, investigator Cox was able to secure a court order to have Dunaway's 1990 burial site excavated. This made it possible to obtain a direct DNA sample for the Carol Sue case, but more significantly, it meant that his DNA would be added to the combined DNA index system, which might connect it to other unresolved murders. Even while the case may not have ended with justice done, Dunaway's identity was made public, which provided some closure. Given his background, his criminal past, and his 1984 release from jail, there are legitimate questions over the actual degree of justice rendered. Even while there is some resolution, it highlights how intricate the criminal justice system is. Moving on to the next case. Barbara Brodkin. In 1993, Barbara Brodkin, a single mother, resided at 155 Balliol Street in Toronto, Canada, with her 6-year-old son Zachary. Barbara worked hard at several jobs, going above and beyond to support her kid and herself. Zachary woke up at 7:40 a.m. on March 19, 1993, to discover the house was strangely silent. Normally, Barbara would wake Zachary up for breakfast every morning, but this particular day she had forgotten to do so. Zachary went to peek at his mother in her bedroom when she didn't come to his room and saw an unsettling sight. In her bedroom, his mother lay in a pool of blood next to a closet. The 6-year-old, horrified, succeeded in contacting the emergency services number. An officer was sent to the apartment on Balliol Street. When police arrived at the apartment, they discovered Barbara's lifeless body, just as the distraught 6-year-old had described it in the 911 call. Barbara had suffered from beatings, strangulations, and knife stabbings. Barbara had turned to selling cannabis in order to support her son, and she had hidden a tiny amount of the plant in her closet. At the time, police surmised that the reason for her death was theft because a cosmetic case containing cash and narcotics was gone from the closet. After an examination, her cause of death was finally identified as a single heart stab wound, even though she appeared to have been strangled. Detectives concluded that Barbara was slain sometime during the night when her 6-year-old was sleeping based on the autopsy's determination of her time of death. The jumbled things in her room indicated that Barbara had put up a strong fight against her assailant. Investigators found that during the attack, the attacker had imprisoned her within the closet. Under Barbara's fingernails, law enforcement found DNA evidence that proved she was able to fight off her attacker and preserve his DNA by scratching him with her nails. Barbara's fingernails were used to gather DNA evidence, which law enforcement then removed and stored for later examination. Although Barbara conducted interviews with her cannabis clients, no meaningful leads or information surfaced from those conversations. Eventually, suspicions would be directed at her former spouse, Christopher Berry. In the late 1980s, she and Berry tied the knot. But the couple's marriage was everything but a marriage made in heaven, and they eventually filed for divorce. It was discovered that Berry had abused and used violence toward Barbara. Following their divorce, they got involved in a contentious custody dispute over their son Zachary, which was still going on when Barbara passed away. Berry was thought to have threatened Barbara verbally multiple times before her death because he lived close to the mother and son. The Toronto police were sure that Berry would be found guilty and that this would be an easy case to solve. Berry was taken in to be questioned. He asserted his innocence and stated that he was with his girlfriend when the crime occurred. His alibi was confirmed by his girlfriend. Police conducted numerous interviews and investigations, but they were unable to connect Berry to the crime. Barry voluntarily gave his DNA sample when the police asked for it to be compared to the DNA found under Barbara's fingernails. Barry passed away in 2009, and authorities were still certain that he was the murderer. Police examined about 300 witnesses, people of interest, and anyone who could have known more about the crime throughout the years. While several suspects were investigated, none of them were ever legally charged. The case would ultimately end in limbo despite community involvement and concern. However, in 2017, the police resumed their investigation and sent Barbara's fingernails to the Center for Forensic Science once more. The DNA under the fingernails was used to construct a DNA profile, which was then uploaded into a database and cross-referenced with Barry's DNA. The results of the DNA test, however, shocked the detectives by ruling Barry out as a suspect. Charles Mustard, one of Barbara's acquaintances, would soon be identified by the DNA. At the time, 37-year-old Charles Mustard had taught elementary school and had a long criminal history. Charles was fired from a Thornhill school after he was accused of 8 counts of sexual assault around the time of the murder. Charles was requested to come down to police headquarters on October 18, 2018, the day before he was arrested, ostensibly to complete some paperwork. He had no idea that the officers had set up a poster of Barbara in the lobby, her name plainly displayed, so they could watch his reaction and record the interaction in secret. He's seen in the footage that was captured intently studying the pictures. Charles stated in court that he did not identify Barbara in the pictures, but given that he had already claimed to be her friend and to have purchased $50 worth of cannabis from her not long before her death, the judge referred to it as a, quote, a flagrant and apparent lie. Charles admitted to the court during the cross-examination that although he was aware at the time that the pictures were of Barbara, he was unaware of this when he first saw them. Charles didn't have a job at the time, and the prosecutor thought he killed Barbara in order to steal the money and the cannabis, leaving behind a helpless 6-year-old who had to grow up without a mother. During his trial, Charles stated that he worked a shift from 3 p.m. to midnight on March 19, 1993, at a seafood restaurant in Barry, but he couldn't remember the name of the eatery or who his previous employer was. Charles objected to the accusations, arguing that the DNA had to have come from a joint he shared with Barbara just before she was killed. He said he had put a layer of saliva on the joint to keep it from burning out and that Barbara might have accidentally touched his palm. Charles maintained that her violent former spouse was the true murderer and that he did not require money. The prosecutor countered that he was not a friend of Barbara's and that he was unemployed at the time. The prosecutor continued by claiming that Barbara had never smoked a joint with Charles and asked why, exactly, she would use both hands if she did smoke a joint with Mustard. Furthermore, Barry's DNA did not match the DNA discovered under Barbara's fingernails, and he had a strong alibi, ruling out his involvement as the murderer. The prosecutor was supported by the judge. During the attack, Barbara had bravely tried to defend herself by scratching Charles. They said that this was the only way his DNA could have passed under her nails. It couldn't have happened by passing a damp joint. Charles Mustard was convicted of Barbara Brodkin's murder in April 2023 and given a 15-year prison term without the possibility of release. When Charles Mustard is free to be released, he will be 83 years old. The family will never be able to fill the void that Barbara's passing left in their hearts, even though the matter was resolved after 30 years. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. Moving on to the next case. Claudette Jean. On February 16, 1986, hikers on the Pacific Crest Trail discovered a grizzly bear near the Los Coyotes Indian Reservation. A partially decomposed woman's body was discovered at the outskirts of the encampment. As soon as they arrived on the site, the San Diego County Sheriff's Office began their investigation. The San Diego County Sheriff's Office received a call shortly after that would fundamentally alter the course of events. A man found 14 kilometers from the female victim was in a similar state. The 2 murder victims were buried under bulky jackets and layers of clothes. Investigators realized that before their killer could be located, They had to identify both remains due to their remarkable similarities. Law enforcement has concealed a lot of information in these two cases. The individual who was found 14 miles distant never had his cause of death revealed in order to protect the integrity of the investigation. It was difficult for the detectives to proceed with either of the cases. The evidence was scant, and what little the San Diego County Sheriff's Office did have was withheld from the press. The media briefly covered Jane Doe's murder before attention faded. The female victim's case would remain unresolved for decades, despite the San Diego County Sheriff's Office knowing that a family was out there searching for their loved one. That is, until 2023, when the office started utilizing genetic genealogy. The hair of Jane Doe was submitted for analysis on websites such as 23andMe and GetMatch. Together with census data and other publicly available information, detectives were able to use this DNA research to build family trees and find relatives. Finding the missing connection was the only task left to the investigators after determining the victim's family tree. Law authorities swiftly recognized the Jane Doe as Claudette Jean Zabolski Powers when she submitted her DNA. When Claudette Jean was brutally murdered, she would have been 24 years old. Detectives put together her life before to her abduction in the early 1980s. She was married and had 2 children. She moved to Washington with her spouse after they sold their Michigan house. After Claudette filed for divorce in 1983, she and her 2 girls were able to purchase a home in San Diego County. But tragedy struck the Powers family in 1984 when her father passed away. When her father passed away, Claudette didn't handle it well. She felt lost after her father passed away because she loved him so much. Family members claim that in September 1984, at her father's burial, Claudette was last seen or talked to. She disappeared entirely from the face of the planet. According to her relatives, they never gave up looking for her. Her siblings recruited a private investigator to assist in their search for her when it appeared impossible to find her. Still, it produced no results. Then, all they could hope for was that she would return home eventually. For all these years, her family was ignorant that she had passed dead because she was never officially reported missing. Even though her identity has been revealed, the inquiry is far from finished. It is now up to the authorities to piece together Claudette's life between September 1984 and September 1986. Anybody with knowledge or who may have known Claudette is asked to come forward. There have been rumors that she worked as a waitress in Escondido. Her family is having a very hard time. In a statement, her sister Laura Fries informed the reporters, "If you know of my sister, you have seen her, you have worked with her." That would have been in the early 1980s, early 1990s, or early 1985 when she went missing. Tell the San Diego Sheriff's Department all you know about her, please. The events are known to someone. The San Diego County Sheriff's Office has not released the cause of death for either Claudette or John Doe. The investigation is still underway. According to their statements, Claudette passed away violently, and they are looking for a male suspect. Besides, they want to know who killed the guy. They said that they were both dressed in thermals and other camping-appropriate clothing, and that the man was roughly Claudette's age, in his mid-20s. It took almost 2 weeks for them to both pass away before their bodies were found. There were no additional found personal goods, bags, or handbags holding camping gear. The crime scene was far distant, thus getting there would have required a car. As of right now, there are no sketches or other identifying characteristics of John Doe. Following Claudette Jean Zabolski Powers' DNA match, her youngest sister Laura Frias, who had been concerned about her for years, was informed. In an interview, Laura recalled her sister, Claudette, as a loving and considerate mother. She loved her kids very much. She was quite fond of her family. She went on to say that since their oldest kid has been found, their mother can die in peace when the time comes. There is currently a $1,000 reward for information leading to the apprehension of Claudette's murderer. Thanks for watching.
you.